Hey independent film watchers, I just left a screening of a film called Gaza by Garry, Keane, and Andrew McConnell. And the film, as the title says, is about the Gaza Strip, that little piece of land in between Israel and Egypt that all of 2 million Palestinians are forced to be on. The piece of land is roughly, I think, 25 miles long and 7 miles wide. So if you can imagine that, it's a very small space with a whole lot of people on it. And it's currently under a blockade because of the Hamas leadership in Palestine right now is deemed as a terrorist organization. And so what Israel and Egypt have decided to do is close all of Palestine on. And as we've learned from history, the only people who suffer from blockades and economic sanctions are the people. And that's really what this film is about, is it's about the people who live within the Gaza Strip. The filmmakers were there for 4 years making this film as they followed a subset of people. So they've got a taxi driver, they've got a man with a large family who's waiting on his son to come back from jail, they've got a little boy who wants to be a fisherman, they've got a little girl who plays the cello. And so they kind of follow the lives of these people as they live day in and day out in this type of an environment. The interesting thing about the film is it starts out actually making it look not that bad. So you're watching the film and you're like, oh, well, this guy's out surfing and this girl's got a nice house where she plays her cello. And, you know, so it doesn't look that bad, but as they're talking, they're explaining what they're having to go through. So with all these sanctions, like they have a hard time getting food and they're limited into how far into the ocean they can fish. So they basically overfish the oceans to feed all that many people. And you kind of hear the stories and the way that they're having to suffer under these sanctions as people are not able to work. So what do the young men do because they have nothing else to do? Well, of course, they go out to the wall and they throw rocks over at the Israelis and they burn tires and they do all this other stuff because, I mean, what else are you supposed to do in this kind of an environment? And I think it's a really interesting story to see that day in and day out of people living within this place that they're just jammed into and still etching out as much of a happy life as they can. It's funny watching the taxi driver as he jokes and laughs with his passengers. And to think about it, like, I get depressed if I've eaten dinner and there's no ice cream in the freezer to have after dinner, right? But these people have to live under the constant fear that any point in time, bombs will come hailing down upon them. I could be recording this video right now, and in the back of my mind, instead of recording videos for YouTube, I'm thinking, a bomb could land on this building, kill me and everybody else in it. And so it's hard to imagine how people have to live this life day in and day out. And it's really great how these filmmakers show us their daily lives. And they don't spend a lot of time focusing on the politics of the conflict. They don't call, you know, they're not constantly calling out the Israeli leadership for what they do, or the Palestinian leadership, or in my case, the US government for supporting the Israeli leadership. So they really just kind of are focusing on the people and how they have to live their lives. And hopefully that story, as it gets out to the world, will help motivate people like us to do something. I don't know what we can do, but we can make videos for YouTube, right? But we can also influence our governments. There is one character in it who says, what would it be like right now if we didn't have Hamas in Palestine? And it's kind of an interesting point because the people, the 2 million people there, are the ones that put Hamas in control of the government, right? So could they do something to change the government? One of the characters, she talks about how when she was younger and how liberal everything was and how fun everything was before Hamas took over. And I think this is what happens when we see these extremist right-wing groups become in control. We see it in Israel, we're seeing it in other parts of the US, right? And it's obviously not as extreme in the US, so don't get all pissy and leave a comment of like, Israel, Palestine's nothing like that, you don't know what the fuck you're talking about kind of thing. So I'm not comparing that, I'm just saying it's interesting to note how when these extremist governments come into control, what influence that has, and people need to see those long-term impacts, because now you've got Palestinians and Israelis at odds with one another, and will that ever change? Probably not, because now they're killing each other, and so people are being raised to hate, right? Palestinians are being raised to hate Israelis for what they're doing, and they show it in this film. At one point, there's a conflict that goes on, and we see these people just being bombarded by Israeli military, and who gets hurt, right? They give you the statistics, like in this particular 30-day war or 90-day war, whatever it was, you had 2,200 Palestinian citizens killed, right? Out of 60 people in the military, that kind of thing. And we see it with the U.S. government as we're invading all of these other countries. Who's the ones that are dying? Well, it's not the people in the military, right? It's the public. It's the ones who have to live there. And that's what this movie tells, is that story of those people who have to live there. I know I'm kind of rambling a little bit because I did just get out of it, so I haven't really fully put together all of my thoughts on the film. I will do a written review, which will be probably a little bit more clear. I'll post that in the link below. The film opens August 9th, so just coming out here, I'm going to post this video a few days before that. So if you do have an opportunity to see it, go see it. It's a very powerful film. The filmmakers draw you in so well, and then by the time you get to the end of it, you're like, wow, that was amazing. So, impressive documentary. I found it worth watching, and I would highly recommend you go watch it. Thanks. There's one thing I do want to call out, though, and it's interesting because I know this isn't something that the filmmakers intended, but it's an issue of mine, and it's global population growth. We're just getting close to the cusp of 8 billion people on the planet. 7 point whatever billion. It's just this massive number you've got it's even more amplified here in Palestine, where you've got 2 million people on this tiny piece of land. And the guys in the film, they talk about how many children they have. Like it's a point of pride to have more children than the next person. I've got 2 children, I've got 3 children, I've got 40 children. Yes, that's right, 3 wives and 40 children. And I think it's amazing that they're talking about, like, well, I bring children into this world of all this violence and this, starving and all of this suffering. And it's like, why? Why are you doing that? And I know a lot of it has to do with religious beliefs, and I'm very anti-religion on a lot of levels, so feel free to get as pissed about that as you want. And this idea that, whatever God you believe in has told you to go out and spread your seed everywhere you possibly can. But I think it's a very selfish thing to do, to have children. And if you do have children, think about that world that you're bringing the children into, and can you afford to support the children? And I know there's, I'm sure, a lack of access to contraception, but just that thought process of what kind of a world you're bringing your children into, and why you would want to do that, and this idea that we need to continue to procreate on this planet. And I'm not saying don't have children. I mean, have one child, 2 child, but it's interesting how those who have access to the least are the ones who tend to produce the most children, and that seems backwards to me. You find the richer, more educated. I'm not calling Palestinians out for education. It seems like everyone's very well educated, so don't get all super pissy about that. I'm just saying I'll call Americans out for that, okay? Because I don't mind insulting redneck Americans. And you look at the U.S. and you look at the red states, these deep red states, and they're the ones that will often have more children versus the blue states, where they're having fewer children. And in those blue states, you see higher income levels, you see better health, you see better education, versus a lot of those red states, like we're talking, Georgia and Tennessee and Louisiana, like those types of states. And I think that works globally as well in regards to countries. And you often see these, so-called third world countries that are producing the most children and utilizing all these resources around them, and you also see that's where a lot of conflict is. And I'm not saying that's the only place where conflict is. I'm just saying that you do see a lot of that, and it's conflict for resources, right? As the Gaza Strip grows, and they're already predicting, like, within the next few years, they won't be able to live in that land anymore. There will be no more resources that they can consume. And so what are people going to start doing? They're going to start dying, right? They're going to starve and die because nobody's helping them, right? We've blocked them off into this tiny little piece of land, and nobody's helping them. And yet, for some reason, they're still breeding. You know, people are still having children. And I'm going to call out every country on the planet for this. The fact that the planet is overpopulated. Resources are stretched thin, and we are continuing to consume more than we need. And this conflict here that we see in this film isn't just a conflict of religion. It's not just a conflict over political ideologies, over warring people, but it's a conflict over resources. And that's a huge thing that they don't talk about in this film. They do a little bit. They mention how that you know, they're running out of fish in their little 3-mile stretch of water that they can fish in. But you know, why are they so in need of this land? And it's because they're a growing population, as everything is, and that's what happens. The more we grow, the more we consume, and the more land we need to consume it on. And that's just a little side rant that I kind of wanted to call out. I know it's going to extend the length of this video, and I'm sure some people will probably be pissed about it because, you know, that's the world we live in now, where we can't have a conversation about anything, where we just have to get mad and hate the other person because they don't have the same opinion that we do. But it is something on my mind as I watch this film, and something on my mind in general,